Morning my husband left for the airport, I made him his favorite breakfast. Scrambled eggs with chives, sourdough toast, the good coffee from the French press he'd gotten me for our anniversary 2 years ago. I stood at the stove in my robe and I watched him eat, and I thought, he has no idea. He thought I was devastated. And honestly, a week earlier I had been. His name is Elliot. We'd been married 6 years, together for 8. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming in Denver. He was standing near the bookshelf with a beer, looking slightly lost, and I thought he was the most handsome man I'd ever seen in a flannel shirt. I was 26. I didn't know anything yet. For most of our marriage, things were good. Not perfect, but good. Elliot worked in oil and gas, project management, the kind of job that took him to job sites out of state a few weeks at a time. I was used to him being gone. I worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. We had a 2-bedroom condo in the Cherry Creek neighborhood. We had a joint savings account that we'd been building for years. House fund, we called it. We wanted to buy something with a yard before I turned 35, a real house. Maybe start a family. That account had just crossed $510,000 when he told me about the assignment. It was a Tuesday night. He'd made dinner, which he almost never did, and I remember thinking that was strange. Pasta, garlic bread, a bottle of Chianti. He sat across from me and said his company was sending him to a long-term project in western Wyoming, a remote natural gas facility about 90 miles outside Cheyenne. Deep in the kinder terrain, my cell service was spotty, and the work camp had strict no-visitor policies for the first year at least, 18 months total. Maybe 20. 18 months, I said. It's a big opportunity, he said. The bonus alone would be enough to pay cash for the house. I asked if I could visit. He said not for a while. The camp didn't allow it initially. Something about insurance liability and the access roads being restricted. He said he'd call whenever he had signal. He said it would go fast. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, actually, for about 10 days. Then I found the folder. He'd left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Just for a minute, he said. He was going back for it. But he got a phone call out on the balcony, and it stretched long, and I walked by the counter and the screen was unlocked. I wasn't trying to snoop. I genuinely wasn't. I was just moving his laptop out of the way so I could wipe the counter down, and the browser was open, and there was a tab I didn't recognize. It was a rental listing. A 2-bedroom apartment in the East Village neighborhood of Cheyenne, Wyoming. Modern kitchen, updated bathrooms, photos of a little girl's bedroom painted lavender. The kind of apartment someone furnishes for a family. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds before I heard him coming back inside. I closed the browser. I smiled at him. I said nothing. That night I lay awake next to him until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. Part of me kept trying to construct an innocent explanation. Maybe it was for a colleague. Maybe it was research. Maybe I had misread what I saw. But there was something about that lavender bedroom, the little heart-shaped wall hooks, the tiny bookshelf already full, that sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. The next morning, after he left for work, I called my cousin Rebecca. Rebecca is not the person most people would call in a crisis. She's blunt to the point of being aggressive. She doesn't sugarcoat anything. And she once told me to break up with a boyfriend at a Thanksgiving dinner because she couldn't stand watching me be small around him. She is also, without question, the person I trust most in the world. I told her what I'd seen. She was quiet for a second, which for Rebecca is unusual, and then she said, "Okay, you need to find out more before you do anything, but you also need to protect yourself. Those are happening at the same time." "You think it's real?" I said. "I think you need to find out," she said. "And I think you already know." She connected me with someone she'd used during her own divorce 3 years earlier, a private investigator out of Denver named Garrett. I felt absurd calling him. I felt like I was in a movie. But I gave him what I had, the apartment listing, the neighborhood, Elliot's travel schedule, and I asked him to look into it. Garrett called me back in 4 days. The apartment in Cheyenne was leased in Elliot's name. He'd signed the lease 8 months earlier. The woman living there was named Adrian, 31 years old, a dental hygienist. They had a daughter together. The little girl had just turned 2. I sat on the floor of my home office for a long time after that call. Not crying, not immediately, just sitting, trying to locate myself inside that information, trying to understand how someone could sit across from you at dinner and talk about building a life together while they already had another one running in parallel. The daughter was 2 years old, which meant that when Elliot and I had been trying to get pregnant, when I'd been tracking my cycle and going to appointments and letting myself be hopeful, he had already been a father. Somewhere else. To someone else. That was when I called the lawyer. Her name was Catherine Solis, a family law attorney a colleague had recommended 2 years earlier after her own divorce. I got an appointment within the week. I walked in with the folder Garrett had given me, lease agreement, photos, documentation, and I laid it on her desk. She looked through it carefully. Then she looked at me. "You have a joint account," she said. "Yes, just over $500,000. And the money in that account, where did it come from primarily?" I told her, my salary mostly. Elliot made decent money, but I made more, and I was the one who had been disciplined about saving for years before we even met. I had $180,000 in that account before we combined finances. Catherine took notes. She told me that in Colorado, marital assets are divided equitably in a divorce, not automatically 50-50, and that given the origin of those funds and Elliot's dissipation of marital assets, the apartment in Cheyenne, the money he'd spent setting up a second household, I would have a strong argument for a significantly larger share. She also told me something else. "He hasn't left yet," she said. "Once he's gone and settles in Cheyenne, it may become harder to serve him quickly. File before he leaves, or be ready to move very fast once he's gone." I drove home in a strange kind of calm. I had never felt so clear in my life. Elliot was flying out on a Friday morning. He'd booked a 7 a.m. departure from Denver International. I said I'd drive him to the airport. Of course I would. I was his wife. I'd always driven him to the airport. He seemed touched by it. He held my hand in the car. He talked about how much he'd miss me, how fast the time would go, how we'd have everything we wanted on the other side of this. I smiled. I said, "I know." At the departures drop-off, he got out and pulled his bags from the trunk. He hugged me, he said, "I love you." And I thought about the lavender bedroom. I thought about that little girl's bookshelf. I thought about lying next to him for the last 4 years while he had been someone else's partner, someone else's co-parent. I hugged him back. I said, "Safe travels." Then I drove home, parked in the garage, and called my bank. I had already done the research. In Colorado, both account holders have full legal access to a joint account. There's nothing stopping either party from withdrawing funds, right up until a court order is in place, and no court order existed yet. I had opened a personal checking account 2 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break, at a different bank. I had already spoken to my branch manager at our shared bank and explained that I would be making a large transfer for a real estate purchase, which was, in the broadest possible sense, eventually true. The transfer took about 40 minutes. $508,400 moved to my account. I kept $2,000 in the joint account. I don't know why I kept those $2,000. Something in me couldn't quite take every penny. Maybe I was leaving a door cracked for him to understand what had happened. Maybe I was just tired. I filed the petition for divorce that afternoon. Catherine had the paperwork ready. She arranged for a process server to reach Elliot at his work camp within the week. He called me 14 hours after the transfer. I didn't answer the first time, or the second. On the third call, I picked up. "What did you do?" he said. It wasn't a question. His voice had that flat quality it got when he was trying to control himself. "I protected myself," I said, "the way you should have protected me." He said a lot of things after that. He said I had no right. He said I had misunderstood. He said the apartment was for a colleague's family, that I'd made assumptions, that I was being irrational. And underneath all of it, I could hear the particular sound of someone who had been certain they would never get caught trying to understand how they had. "I have the lease, Elliot," I said. "I have the photos. I have the birth record. I know about your daughter." Long silence. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I know you are," I said, and I hung up. The divorce process took 11 months. It wasn't easy. Elliot hired an aggressive attorney who argued that I had improperly cleaned out the account, and there were months of depositions and financial discovery, and days when I came home from work and sat at my kitchen table and felt hollowed out in a way I hadn't expected. Catherine was calm and thorough and relentless. She documented everything. My contributions to the account going back to before we were even married, Elliot's expenditures on the Cheyenne apartment, the pattern of financial deception. The settlement gave me 73% of the marital assets. Elliot's attorney framed it as an outrage. Catherine framed it as precisely fair, given that the marital home fund was built primarily on my earnings and that Elliot had spent approximately $40,000 in marital funds on his second household over the previous 2 years. I kept the condo. I kept the savings. I let Elliot keep his truck. The strangest part wasn't the legal proceedings. The strangest part was that first year of living alone, the absolute quiet of it, and then, slowly, the way that quiet started to feel like space instead of emptiness. I started running again, something I'd given up in my late 20s. I started cooking things I actually wanted to eat instead of compromising around his preferences. I had a whole bookshelf to myself, and I filled it with everything I'd been meaning to read for years. Rebecca flew in for a long weekend about 3 months after the divorce finalized. We drank wine on my balcony, and she looked at me for a long time and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" I said. "Like yourself," she said, "like the version of you from before." I met someone through work the following spring. His name is Wyatt. He's a financial advisor who'd partnered with my firm on a client's estate plan, and the first time we met in the conference room, I thought he was too cheerful for how early it was. He brought coffee for the whole room, which was either thoughtful or aggressively people-pleasing, and I couldn't decide which. It turned out to be the former. We were friends for several months before anything else. He knew I was recently divorced. He didn't push. He asked about my running once. I'd mentioned it offhand in the meeting, and then the next week he mentioned a trail race in Evergreen he was thinking about doing, and asked if I had any tips about altitude training, and I'm not sure that was entirely accidental, but I appreciated the indirection. We started dating the following October. He met Rebecca at Christmas, and she texted me afterward from the bathroom of the restaurant. "He's good. He actually listened to me for 20 minutes straight." Hold on to this one. From Rebecca. That is essentially a standing ovation. I'm not going to say the last 2 years have been effortless. Trusting someone new after what happened with Elliot is not a switch you flip. There are moments when Wyatt is quiet for too long or takes too long to respond to a text, and some animal part of my brain starts scanning for danger. I've been working on that. I see a therapist every other week, and she has been, genuinely, one of the most useful things I've done for myself. But here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was 26, standing near that bookshelf at a housewarming party, thinking the most handsome man in the room was looking at me like I was worth knowing. You can love someone and still not know them. You can build something real with someone who is also quietly building something else. And when the ground gives way beneath you, you don't have to stand on it anymore. I used the condo equity to buy a house last fall. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen with an actual breakfast nook that gets morning light. I put a reading chair by the window in the front room. I planted rosemary along the front walk, because I read somewhere that it's supposed to grow for the brave. I don't know if I'm brave, but I know I didn't stay. And some days that feels like the same thing. I still have the French press he gave me for our anniversary. It sits on the counter in my new kitchen, the one with the breakfast nook that gets morning light. Some mornings I look at it and feel nothing. Some mornings I feel everything at once. I've stopped trying to decide which one is the right response. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something, is that what happened to me wasn't just about betrayal. It was about what I chose to do with the truth once I had it. And that choice, more than anything Elliot did, is the part of the story I actually own. There's a version of me that stays, that talks herself out of what she saw on that laptop screen, that finds the innocent explanation, accepts it, moves on. I know that version well because I was her for almost 2 weeks, lying awake at 3 in the morning, trying to make the math work, wanting so badly for the lavender bedroom to mean something other than what it meant. Staying in that story would have been easier in some ways. Easier and smaller and, eventually, hollow all the way through. The thing about building a life with someone who is lying to you is that you don't just lose the relationship when you find out. You lose the version of yourself that existed inside that relationship. The one who trusted without question, who saved without knowing she was saving towards something that was already gone. That loss is real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But here's what I also know. I did the right thing. Not in a self-congratulatory way, not in a I won way, just in the quiet, plain sense of the word. When the moment came, I didn't fall apart. I called Rebecca. I called Garrett. I called Catherine. I gathered information before I acted. I protected what I had built with my own hands before anyone else could take it. That steadiness, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just shows up when you need it, that came from somewhere inside me that 6 years of marriage hadn't touched. I'm grateful for it. I try to keep it in good shape. What Elliot did had its own logic, its own cause and effect. He made choices, quietly, over years, and those choices accumulated into a reality that couldn't hold. I don't need to assign it a cosmic meaning to understand that it was inevitable. When you build something on a foundation of deception, the ground gives way, eventually. It always does. Not as punishment, just as consequence. And I made my own choices. I chose to look at the screen instead of away from it. I chose to call the people who would tell me the truth instead of the ones who would tell me what I wanted to hear. I chose to walk into a lawyer's office with a folder of evidence instead of a folder of excuses. Those choices were mine, and they changed everything. Wyatt asked me once what I would tell my younger self, if I could. I thought about it for a long time. I think I'd tell her, keep your own account. Not just the financial kind, though yes, that too, genuinely, please do that. But keep your own sense of what is real. Keep your own counsel. Keep the part of you that knows things before you're ready to say them out loud. That part is not paranoia. That part is intelligence. Trust it. The rosemary along the front walk is coming in thick this spring. I planted it last fall, not entirely sure it would survive the Colorado winter. It did. Some things do.